I spent 3 years and $247,000 turning a falling-apart farmhouse into the only place my mother had ever called home. When I pulled into the gravel driveway on a Thursday afternoon in early November, my brother-in-law's truck was already there. So was a locksmith's van, and the locksmith was not changing the locks for my mother. My name is Soursey. I'm 31. I work as a paralegal at a mid-sized firm in Ottawa that handles mostly estate and property law, which means I spend my days reading documents that other people signed without fully understanding what they were agreeing to. I know what a title transfer looks like. I know what a power of attorney can and cannot authorize. I know the difference between a gift and a loan and a claim, and I know exactly how many ways a person can use paperwork to take what they were never given. I learned most of this sitting beside my mother in a hospital waiting room when I was 22, watching her try to understand what the doctor was saying about early-stage MS and what it would mean for the years ahead. She had her hands folded in her lap the way she always did when she was frightened. She didn't ask any questions. She just nodded slowly and said, "Well, we'll manage then." That was my mother's entire philosophy. We'll manage. She had been managing her whole life. My father died when I was 16. He left behind a mortgage that was almost paid off, a 1994 pickup truck that didn't run, and a habit in my mother of believing that love meant not asking for anything. She went back to work at the school board within 2 weeks of the funeral. She kept every receipt. She never once complained in front of me or my sister, though I heard her through the wall sometimes at night when she thought I was asleep. My sister is 4 years older than me. She moved to Calgary the year before my father died, met her husband there, built a life that looked, from the outside, like exactly the life she had always wanted. The wedding was beautiful. The house in the suburbs is large. Her husband coached their son's hockey team and made a point of mentioning it often. I don't want to spend too many words on my brother-in-law because he doesn't deserve them, but I need you to understand what he is before the rest of this makes sense. He is not a dishonest person in the way that gets noticed. He is dishonest in the way that gets noticed. He is dishonest in the way that gets results. He understands that if you frame something as reasonable, most people won't push back. He speaks in sports metaphors and financial logic, and he has the particular confidence of a man who has never once been held accountable for anything by anyone who mattered to him. My sister is not a bad person. She's a person who has spent 15 years learning to see the world through his eyes because it is easier than maintaining her own. When the MS diagnosis came, my sister flew in for a week. She cried. She hugged my mother. She and my brother-in-law had a long conversation at our kitchen table about options and practical considerations and what made sense going forward. My brother-in-law used the phrase going forward 4 times in 20 minutes. None of the options they discussed included either of them doing anything differently. I moved back to Ottawa 6 months later, not because anyone asked me to, because I could see what was coming, and I didn't want to be the person who watched it arrive from a safe distance. The farmhouse belonged to my grandparents. My grandfather built it himself in the late 1950s on a few acres outside of Carleton Place, about an hour west of Ottawa. My grandmother lived there until she passed, and then it sat mostly empty for 7 years because no one in the family could agree on what to do with it, and no one wanted to be the one to sell it. It was in rough shape when I started paying attention to it. The roof needed replacing. The foundation had been patched 3 times. The heating system was original and unreliable in a way that matters a great deal when you live an hour from the city in central Ontario. And February is coming. But the land was right, flat enough to be accessible, quiet in the specific way that means something to a person who needs rest. There was a covered porch that caught the afternoon light and a small wood stove in the kitchen that my grandmother had used every winter for 40 years. I saw my mother stand at the window of that kitchen once, when we were clearing out some of my grandmother's things, and I watched her exhale in a way I hadn't seen her exhale in years. She didn't say anything. She just stood there and looked at the yard and the birch trees at the edge of it and breathed. I started making calls that same month. The estate had to be formally settled first, which took longer than it should have because my uncle had opinions, and my uncle's wife had more opinions, and none of them wanted to be involved, but all of them wanted to be consulted. I navigated that process the same way I navigate everything at work, carefully, thoroughly, and without broadcasting what I was planning, until the moment it was settled. When the property finally cleared, I purchased it outright to a holding arrangement I'd structured with guidance from the senior partner at my firm. I did not ask my sister for input. I did not tell my brother-in-law it was happening. The renovation took just under 3 years. I hired a contractor out of Perth who had done accessible builds before and understood what I meant when I said I needed this to be livable long-term, not just livable now. Wide doorways, a bathroom on the main floor with enough space to maneuver, handrails that looked like design choices rather than medical equipment, a kitchen layout that worked on a good day and still worked on a hard one. We replaced the roof, re-insulated the whole structure, put in a propane system with a backup electric baseboard in every room so she would never be cold if one thing failed. I paid for all of it. The purchase, the build, the furnishings, the new well pump, the accessibility upgrades, the long driveway gate with the keypad so she wouldn't have to get out of her car in winter. $247,000 over 3 years, managed in phases, financed through a combination of savings and a line of credit I had structured specifically for this purpose. I set up automatic payments for property tax through my own account and prepaid the first 10 years of her home insurance. When everything was finished, I placed the property into a life estate arrangement with my mother named as the life tenant. She has the absolute and exclusive right to live there for the rest of her life. She cannot be removed. She cannot be pressured to sell. She cannot have decisions about the property made on her behalf without her explicit written consent. I am named as the remainder man, which means the property comes to me after her lifetime. And I am also designated as the sole person with authority to act on property matters during her tenancy. I had this reviewed by 2 lawyers before I signed anything. I had the plain language summary version framed and put in the kitchen drawer next to the good scissors. Then I drove her out there on a Saturday morning in late August, told her I had something to show her, and watched her realize what she was looking at. She stood on the porch for a long time without speaking. The birch trees were still there. The wood stove was lit because I had driven out the day before to light it. She walked through every room with her hand trailing along the wall, and she did not say anything for almost 10 minutes. And then she sat down at the kitchen table and put her face in her hands, and I let her cry because she had earned it. She said, "I don't understand how you did this." I said slowly and without telling anyone. She laughed through the tears, which was what I was going for. I stayed the first weekend. We ate takeout from the diner in Carleton Place and watched the sun go down over the back field, and I helped her figure out the baseboard controls, and we argued pleasantly about where to put the couch. On Sunday night, when I drove back to Ottawa, I felt something I can only describe as rightness. Not happiness exactly, something more structural than that. I should have known better than to feel that settled. My sister found out the following week. My mother called her to share the news, which was the right thing to do. And my mother's happiness is not a subtle thing when it is real, so the call was probably not difficult to read. My sister asked for the address. My mother texted me that same evening. Her message said, she wants to come see it with him and the kids next weekend. Just a quick visit. Is that all right with you? I wrote back, "It's Mom's home. She decides who visits." She sent back, "I know, I just thought I should check," which was her way of telling me she had already felt something pull sideways and wasn't sure what to do about it. I should have driven up that weekend. Instead, I had a file deadline and a client call. I couldn't move, and I told myself it was just a visit, and that my sister was not her husband, and that the legal structure was solid, and that I needed to stop treating every family event like a transaction waiting to go wrong. My mother called me on the Monday morning after their visit. Her voice had that particular flatness that meant she was choosing her words very carefully. "He walked the whole property," she said. "He asked about the well output. He asked whether the septic had been inspected recently. He asked about the zoning. I asked her what she told him. She said she didn't know the answers, so she just said she wasn't sure. I said that was fine." She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "He took a lot of photographs. Of the road frontage, mostly. And the barn foundation at the back." I said I'd come up Wednesday. I was wrong about Wednesday. The message that moved the timeline came Tuesday afternoon, from my mother, 3 words, "Please call me." When I reached her, she was trying very hard to sound calm and not quite getting there. She told me that my brother-in-law had called her that morning. He had said he'd been doing some research and wanted to have a family conversation about the property. He said he had spoken to someone who had looked at the zoning, and there was a possibility of severance, meaning splitting the lot and selling the back portion, and that it could generate significant equity. He said the money could be put in trust for her care. He used the phrase, her care, 3 times. He said my sister agreed it was worth exploring. He said he thought I would come around if I understood the numbers. My mother said, I told him it wasn't my decision to make. He told me that wasn't quite right, that as the life tenant I had more say than I realized. He had Googled enough to be dangerous and not enough to understand what he was looking at. I told her I would be there Thursday morning. I told her not to agree to any conversations or meetings or calls about the property until I arrived. She said she understood. She sounded relieved in the exhausted way of someone who has been holding something heavy and has just been told they can set it down for a moment. I left Ottawa at 6 in the morning. He was there when I arrived. So was my sister. Their kids were watching something on a tablet in the living room. My mother was in the kitchen with a mug she had clearly been holding for warmth rather than drinking from. My brother-in-law was at the table with a printed sheet of paper and the easy posture of someone who believes the meeting has already been decided. He looked up when I came in and said, "Good, now we can actually talk." I set my bag down and looked at my mother first. She looked back at me in the way that meant, "I'm sorry and thank you, and please handle this." My sister was standing near the window. She gave me a careful smile and said, "We just want to make sure Mom is protected." I said, "From what?" She glanced at her husband. He leaned back. "From a situation where all her equity is tied up in a property she can't access," he said. "If she needs care down the line, and with MS that's a realistic conversation, this land is her only real asset." Severance makes sense. The back portion is more than 2 acres. We're talking a significant number. The money goes into a care account. We manage it together as a family. Everyone benefits. My mother said quietly, "I don't want to sell the back fields." He said, "It's not about what we want, it's about what makes practical sense." My mother said nothing. Her hands tightened around the mug. I had driven out the Wednesday before the first visit and walked the full property line. I had already pulled the township's zoning schedule. I already knew what he apparently didn't. I went to my bag and took out the folder I had brought. "I want to show you something," I said. I placed the first document on the table. "This is the registered life estate deed," I said. "This establishes my mother as the sole life tenant of this property with exclusive rights of use and occupancy. As life tenant, she has the right to live here, the right to enjoy the property, and the right to refuse any modification, transaction, or use she has not personally and explicitly authorized in writing." He looked at the document, then at me. I continued. "This is the property designation under Lanark County zoning," I said, placing the second page down. "This lot is designated rural residential. Severance applications on rural residential lots in this county require a minor variance hearing, notification to all adjacent property owners, a site evaluation, and approval from the County Land Division Committee. The process takes a minimum of 8 months and is not guaranteed. It requires the consent of the registered property holder and the life tenant. I am the registered holder. My mother is the life tenant. Neither of us is consenting." My sister said wryly. I said, "My name is Serza." She blinked. It was not the moment she had expected that correction. I placed the third document on the table. "This is a legal opinion from a property lawyer I retained independently," I said. "It confirms that the life estate structure is valid and properly registered with Lanark County, that the remainderman, that's me, holds the reversionary interest and cannot be compelled to participate in any property transaction, and that a non-title holding third party has no standing to initiate, file, or advance any application regarding this property. Non-title holding third party means you," I said, looking at my brother-in-law. "You have no legal standing in relation to this property. None." The table was quiet. He said, "The life estate can be challenged. Life tenants have rights that supersede the remainderman in certain circumstances." I said, "You're describing waste doctrine, which applies when a life tenant damages or depletes the property. My mother is living here. That is exactly what a life tenancy is for. Waste doctrine does not apply, and even if it did, it would be my claim to make, not yours." He was recalibrating. I could see it happening in real time. He was used to being the person in the room who had done the most research. And he had just discovered that was not the case here. I placed the last document in the folder on the table. "This is a formal notice," I said. "It's addressed to both of you. It states that any attempt to initiate, encourage, file, or participate in any application, transaction, inquiry, or process relating to this property without the written consent of both the life tenant and the remainder man will be treated as interference with a registered property interest and pursued accordingly. My firm's senior partner has reviewed it. She's expecting my call this afternoon." My sister said, "You can't be serious." I said, "I've been serious about this property for 3 years. I don't know why that would stop now." My brother-in-law pushed back from the table. He stood up and picked up his printed page and held it for a moment as though deciding something. Then he set it back down. "You did all of this," he said, "because you want to control everything. You always have. You built this place so you could hold it over the family. I looked at him. I built this place, I said, because my mother stood in this kitchen 8 years ago and breathed for the first time in years. Because she has spent her entire adult life managing things alone and asking for nothing. Because she has a diagnosis that will not get easier, and she deserves somewhere that would hold her without conditions. I built it because when I was 22 years old, I sat beside her in a waiting room and watched her fold her hands in her lap, so no one would know she was frightened. I am not interested in controlling anything. I am interested in making sure that what I built for her is still standing when she needs it most. He said nothing. I looked at my sister. Her expression had shifted into something I hadn't seen in a long time. Something that looked like she was seeing the room clearly for the first time in a while. I need you both to leave, I said. Mom will call you when she'd like a visit. That's her decision to make. What followed was not smooth. My brother-in-law spent 10 minutes in the driveway on his phone. My sister went to the bathroom and stayed there for a while. The kids finished their show and asked if they were going soon. Eventually, both vehicles pulled out onto the county road and the gravel settled and the yard went quiet. My mother made tea. We sat at the kitchen table and didn't say much for a while. She said he's been like this the whole visit. I said, I know. She said, I kept thinking you'd call. I said, I know. I'm sorry it didn't come sooner. She was quiet, and then she said, how did you know to bring all of that? I said, I've known who he is for 6 years. I should have prepared this the day I registered the deed. I didn't because I wanted you to have some time where this was just yours before it became something to defend. She wrapped both hands around her mug. She said, it's still mine. I said, yes, it is. 3 days later, my brother-in-law posted something online. It was vague in the specific way of someone who wants plausible deniability. Something about generosity with strings and real family not keeping score. My sister shared it. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in 4 years sent me a message asking if everything was okay. I wrote one email. It was addressed to both of them with my firm's senior partner copied. It noted that any verifiable public statement referencing me, my mother, or the property would be assessed for defamation and tortious interference with a registered property interest. It requested that all future communication be directed to my firm's office. The posts were gone within 36 hours. I moved their email addresses to a folder I check on my own schedule. The call I did not expect came 6 weeks later, on a Wednesday morning, from my mother. Her voice was steady, but her words came out fast. There's a man at the door, she said. He says he's from a land development company. He has a card. He says someone contacted them about the property on our behalf. I told her to go inside and lock the door and not sign anything. I pulled up the driveway camera on my laptop from my office. A car. A man in the jacket holding a folder, standing on the porch looking at his phone. I called the OPP non-emergency line and reported an individual presenting on private property under false authorization. Then I sent my brother-in-law a text. It was a screenshot from the camera feed and one sentence. I am watching this in real time. The life estate is registered with Lanark County, and copies are held by local law enforcement. I strongly recommend your contact leave before the cruiser arrives. He replied in 11 minutes. Wrong address, he said. Sorry, our mistake. The car was gone before the officer reached the road. That weekend, I drove up with a locksmith and replaced every exterior lock with keypad deadbolts, so my mother would never have to manage keys on a difficult hand day. I showed her the camera app on her tablet and made sure the feeds were labeled and easy to read. She stood beside me at the kitchen counter and watched the driveway feed refresh and shook her head slowly. She said, I keep thinking about all the years I spent trying not to be trouble. I said, you were never trouble. She said, I know that now, I think. I'm still learning. She was quiet for a moment. She said he called the week after they left, not him, your sister. I hadn't known that. She said she didn't apologize exactly. She said she didn't realize how far he had taken it. She said she thought it was just a conversation. I didn't respond to that. My mother said, I told her she was welcome to visit, without him for now. She looked at me. I hope that's all right. I said, it's your house. You decide. She said, I know. I'm still getting used to that. My sister came up 2 weeks later on her own on a Saturday. I wasn't there. My mother called me that evening and said it had been fine. Careful, a little strange, but fine. She said my sister had sat on the porch for a long time just looking at the field. I don't know what comes after that. I'm not standing at the door of it waiting. My brother-in-law sent a message 3 months after the driveway incident. Subject line, moving forward. He said he recognized he had approached the situation poorly and that he hoped we could find a way to keep the family intact. I read it once. I moved it to the folder. What I understand now, coming back to that farmhouse on a gray December afternoon with a bag of groceries and no particular emergency and nothing that needs solving, is that I spent a long time believing that love required constant availability, that caring for someone meant absorbing whatever came at them, that if you built something and then protected it, you were the difficult one. I know better now. I can love my mother completely and refuse to let what I built for her become a negotiation. I can love my sister and still hand her husband a cease and desist. I can want my family to be whole and still hold the line that makes wholeness possible. A boundary isn't a punishment. It's what makes the rest of it real. I found my mother on the porch when I arrived, wrapped in the old wool blanket she'd had since before I was born, with a mug of tea and a paperback face down on her knee. The birch trees were bare. The back field had a thin layer of snow that had come overnight and not been touched yet. She heard my tires on the gravel and turned and smiled in a way she used to smile when I was small, before things got hard, before managing became the whole project of her life. I carried the groceries inside and she followed me, and we stood in the kitchen that I had built for her hands and her reach and her particular kind of tired, and she put on the kettle and I unpacked the bag. And we did not have to say anything at all, because there was nothing that needed saying. That is what I built it for. Not the property, not the title, not the legal structure, clean as it is. This, just this. I keep thinking about the locksmith span. That's the detail that comes back to me most. Not the folder on the kitchen table, not my brother-in-law's voice going thin when he ran out of angles. The van. Because it tells you everything about how that kind of thinking works. It assumes the ground has already shifted before anyone has pushed back. It assumes that showing up with a plan is the same as having the right. What I've understood slowly over the years since that November morning is that what happened at that farmhouse was not really about property law. The legal structure mattered. I won't pretend otherwise, and I won't pretend I didn't feel something when I placed that third document on the table and watched him realize the research he'd done wasn't going to be enough. But the structure was only ever the frame. What was actually happening was something older and simpler. Someone had decided that a woman living quietly on her own land, with a diagnosis that would only get harder, was a softer target than a legal argument, that her need made her manageable. They were wrong, and the reason they were wrong was not luck, and it was not karma in any mystical sense. It was 3 years of consistent, unglamorous work. Every permit pulled on time. Every clause reviewed twice. Every payment documented. I am a paralegal. I read contracts for a living. I know what it costs to skip a step and find out later what you missed. So I didn't skip steps. That's not heroism. That's just paying attention to what matters and doing the work that attention requires, even when no one is watching and no one will thank you for it. My mother spent decades managing things alone because she believed that needing help was an imposition. I spent years watching her manage and wishing she would let me carry something. When I finally built something for her, built it properly, with every legal protection I knew how to put in place, I understood for the first time what it actually means to do right by someone. Not grand gestures, not performances of love, the willingness to do the hard, quiet, unsexy thing before it becomes urgent. That's what I mean when I use the word integrity. It's not a feeling. It's a practice. You either do it consistently or you don't. The sharpest moment in that kitchen, sharper even than the cease and desist, was when my mother said, "I keep thinking about all the years I spent trying not to be trouble." She wasn't talking about the farmhouse. She was talking about her whole life, and I sat with that for a long time afterward, because I recognized it. The belief that you are only worth what you produce, that asking for rest is selfish, that holding a boundary makes you the difficult one. These are not personal failings. They are things people learn when the people around them benefit from their smallness. What changed for her in that farmhouse, and slowly for me too, was the understanding that knowing your own worth is not arrogance. It is the foundation that everything else has to stand on. My mother had spent her life being competent in service of others. She earned the right to say, "This is mine. You cannot touch it." She earned the right to exhale on a porch in the afternoon light without wondering what it was costing her. I think about what it takes to build something that holds. You need the knowledge to do it right. You need the steadiness to see it through when it gets complicated. And underneath both of those, you need the basic conviction that the person you're building it for is worth protecting, and that you are allowed to be the one who does it. That last one took me the longest to believe. I think it takes most of us the longest.